Hello, welcome to Lazada Insider, featuring knowledge that makes a difference. We share trusted insights, forward-looking perspectives, and exclusive expert interviews to keep you ahead of the curve.
Hi everyone, welcome to Lazada Insider. I'm your host, Chen. As Southeast Asia experiences economic growth, there's also a growing awareness among consumers in the region about the impact of their consumption choices on the environment and society. Today, we will be exploring the latest insights about the needs and motivations of sustainable shoppers in the region and discussing how businesses can serve this growing market. We are very happy to welcome Nicole, Vice President of Global Thought Leadership from Nielsen IQ, to share her perspective on this topic. Nicole has almost 30 years of experience in helping businesses understanding the evolving consumer landscape and driving new opportunities. Hi, Nicole.
Hi, Chen. Thanks very much for having me.
First of all, could you tell us a bit more about yourself and Nielsen IQ?
Yeah, sure thing. So thank you very much for having me here today. So I am the Vice President and work within our Global Thought Leadership team here at Nielsen IQ. And for those of you who don't know, Nielsen IQ is a global market research company, and we really aim to deliver the full view of consumer buying behaviour, which we hope can help brands and retailers really to navigate and find new pathways of growth. And that might be through measuring more channels, more countries, more consumers, to really give that full breadth of how the fast-moving consumer goods industry is evolving. From our thought leadership point of view, what myself and my team really aim to look at is the disruptive forces of change that we see accelerating across our ecosystem. And we believe that, this is really useful for businesses to try and think and plan ahead for how these disruptive forces are going to be impacting their business in the coming years. As an example, what we're obviously here to talk about today is at the beginning of this year, we launched our latest topic, which we called the changing climate of sustainability. And a component of this bigger topic, which I think we have another podcast where we'll be talking about, two of the other big disruptive drivers of change. But the one we're focusing on today is the consumer element, where we did a consumer survey across 17 different markets around the world, but particularly so you know which ones we're talking about today within Asia Pacific that covered Australia, Indonesia, Singapore, Thailand, South Korea, China, and India. So a fairly robust coverage there.
Thanks for the introductions. Let's go straight to the research insight. How has consumers' demand for sustainable consumers packaged goods, CPG products, evolved post-pandemic in Southeast Asia? Are there any particular issues or trends that are motivating consumers to make more sustainable choices?
Well, I think, Chen, over the last 10 years, we've really seen sort of a positive consumer sentiment towards sustainability. And we anticipated that purchasing preferences would probably drive the industry towards a green revolution, really from consumer demand alone. But what we've actually discovered, and particularly in the last 12 to 18 months, is that there's been a number of challenges that have really slowed that progress and led to a situation where consumers and companies haven't really seen that change that they might have thought. So obviously COVID was a massive disruption that refocused, both businesses and consumers' attention away from sustainability. And, if we think of our own lives and examples, obviously there was the huge push and focus on hygiene, and, that meant more plastic, more disposable, be it masks, be it cutlery, where we'd, shifted those things to, reusable coffee cups and things like that in the past. And then in the last 12 months, we've seen that disruption continue, with the cost of living crisis, which is really etching away at consumers' disposable income and really having an impact and changing their priorities. But in that last 2 years at the same time, we've also seen an increasing awareness and attention just on the impact that climate change is having. We see it in the news all the time. We see the effect of extreme weather events is having both on businesses and their supply chains, but also the very real personal experiences that consumers are seeing in their everyday lives. So just as an example, one of the stats from our study is 94% of Asia Pacific consumers state that sustainability is important to them today, 41% saying it's much more important than it was 2 years ago. And there's lots of reasons as to why they're saying that. But some of the big sort of call outs is obviously that awareness is really critical, just in terms of it being in the news and, hearing, sustainability and climate change being spoken about so much. But some of the other really big ones were the impact that consumers feel that climate change is already having on their health now, or that could have on their health and safety in the future, was another key one. In terms of what was really important for Asia Pacific consumers, more so than our global counterparts, where they were seeing that the cost of things had become more expensive as a result of climate events. But to me, more than anything is, that personal impact as well that an extreme weather event is having on consumers. And our Asia Pacific consumers felt that more so than global. So globally, about 30% of people had said that sustainability was more important to them because climate or extreme weather had personally impacted their lives. But in Asia Pacific, that was 38%. And in some markets, for example, South Korea, it was 54%, Indonesia, 43%. And I think if we look at what those extreme weather events were, we can start to see the very real impact that that's having on consumers' lives.
Thanks. We know that sustainability is a pretty broad topic. I think just now you also mentioned multiple aspects of it. So I'm curious, are there any particular area of sustainability that are currently receiving more attention from Southeast Asian consumers than others? If yes, why?
I think probably, as we just were talking about, that personal impact is particularly telling, because I think people start to then suddenly feel a lot more vulnerable, and the feeling that, if this is really impacting me. I know even personally we had, a room in our house was flooded last year in the Brisbane floods, is you start to say, okay, I've got to start to do something about this now. And I think, particularly across Southeast Asia, with the COVID disruption and lockdowns, we've become used to those highly urbanized societies as well, where pollution is a massive aspect in those societies. And we actually saw, because of fewer tourists, because of lockdowns, what life could be like if, we didn't have, some of these urban, threats that I suppose we get very used to living. And so I think, it has become that sort of call to action where consumers are starting to say, I realise the importance and I want to do something about it to try and, speed up the momentum to, because, I think it's all becoming very telling, the real impact it's starting to have. It's not a far off in the distance thing that we're talking about, degrees of temperature in, 10, 15 years' time.
Talking about personal impact. So in the recent few years, increasingly more consumers express an intent to live more sustainably. So do their behaviors now actually reflect this intent? Or can you share some of the key sustainable consumers' behavior that you have observed in Southeast Asia?
Yeah, it's really interesting, Chen, because what we two key measures that we looked at was the percent of consumers who are saying that sustainability is very important to them. So that sort of looks at that intent to action versus the actual number of actions that they're saying they take in a daily life to live sustainably. And so it's almost a bit of that say-do ratio that we hear spoken about quite a lot. And again, there's some really interesting components. So remembering that there's those two angles of it, but you had the likes of Australia and Singapore who were less likely to say that sustainability was very important. But in fact, the actions that they do today are reasonable. They're above, the global average, compared to the likes of an Indonesia or Thailand, where they're saying that sustainability is really important. So, up in the high 80s, for example, but they're struggling to try and convert that into action. So they're doing fewer actions per se. So that say-do ratio can be very different across different markets. And I think that becomes sort of the challenge for, brands, retailers and governments, which is to say, how do we make it easier for consumers to live sustainably moving forward? We know already that consumers are doing a number of things. So just across Asia Pacific on a whole, the top actions that they're saying that they're doing is using reusable shopping bags, for example. They're also, trying to avoid waste in many ways. A number of markets trying to limit the amount of electricity that they're using. And recycling is also a very big one for Asia Pacific. And I think, if we look across the board, that focus on pollution, that reducing of plastic is a very real one that people are seeing in their daily environments. But I think one other interesting one that really stood out for me, and globally it was, lower sort of down the list, was the amount of consumers, or the percentage of consumers who are using refills or buying refillable containers. So globally that percentage was about 30 odd percent, I think, but it was particularly big, 33% it was actually. But if we had a look across our different markets, we could see in Indonesia, for example, 54% of people are saying that they're using refills. In Singapore, 41%, South Korea, 44%. So I think it becomes a real way. Maybe it's that focus on reducing plastic, in the surroundings that consumers find themselves in. But, some of these actions are going to be easier to get consumers across the line on than others.
Let's zoom into the shopping specifically. What role does sustainability play in the shopping experience for CPG products? And how has this changed in the face of other factors such as convenience or affordability?
I think without a doubt, sustainability is an important consideration for some when they're choosing to buy. But I think we also need to recognise that, especially in today's environment where we're seeing huge inflationary pressures and consumers are really feeling that squeezing of their wallet, that consumers are going to be weighing up a variety of considerations when they're choosing what brands to buy. So when we looked at our survey and we asked our consumers exactly to do that, and we asked them to do a bit of a trade-off as we did those things. So affordability came through by far as the most important attribute to our consumers right now. Again, not surprising if you think of that cost of living crisis that we're seeing around the world. It has been less felt, I would say, in our Asia Pacific markets than it has been in Europe and the US, where inflation levels have been substantially higher, but consumers are still definitely feeling it. In terms of those priorities, health and hygiene still is up there as number 2 and 3 on the radar, but sustainability is coming in, just underneath that. So I think, it's there. It's going to become increasingly important. And I think, if we look at the broader context, as government regulations start to come in, and without a doubt, Asia Pacific governments are a little bit behind the likes of Europe that we see, for example, in terms of the regulatory changes that is happening in this space. But what we're going to start to see is that sustainability is going to become the new norm that's required of products. So, we need to really start to be saying, that products it'll almost be a mandate or a part of a product, so that consumers and, suppliers will need to make sure that that's there for consumers. So that trade-off will probably lessen as it becomes a prerequisite to be on shelf moving forward.
You talk about living costs just now. So what are some of the other big challenges that consumers are facing when trying to shop sustainably?
Look, I think without a doubt, and again, it does differ a little bit for Asia Pacific compared to globally, but cost or affordability, as we saw, is one of the key drivers of brand choice. And then when we ask consumers what's stopping them from living sustainably, cost as a barrier is up there as number 2 within Asia Pacific. So accessibility, however, is the biggest one in Asia Pacific across the board. So, and what that means is it could be just not having enough choice in terms of the range of sustainable options that there are for consumers to buy, or there just not being an option at all on shelf as well. So, and I think that's a really big call out to brands and retailers. How do we make sure that we have enough offering, that we have enough variety? And then obviously, in terms of what we're charging for those products once we're on shelf, how do we make sure that we're putting forward an affordable proposition to consumers to help them make a better choice? Because they want to live, they're saying they want to live sustainably, but they just need help in doing so.
So I just wanted to deep dive into it further. So how can brands and retailer or e-commerce platform work together to address this barrier and make sustainable shopping more accessible and appealing to our consumers?
So I think one of the key things we said to consumers in our study as well was, who do they believe is most responsible for driving sustainable progress moving forward? And it was really interesting. Their response was, brands and local government were neck and neck in terms of who they believed, is most responsible for doing that. And I think when you start to think about what can brands, or what are the consumers asking brands to do for help, one of the biggest things is they're asking for clearer labeling and, on their packaging, in terms of understanding, is this product truly sustainable? What are the sustainability standards that it's gone through? So they want help to make sure that they're making the right choice in doing that. And I think specifically from an e-commerce point of view, it's the ideal environment to be able to give consumers that information that they require. So you're not restricted as you are in store, on just the amount of information you can put on label per se. So, you can send them off on different paths as they're looking, if they want to drill down, if they want to find, the supply chain or the source of ingredients, things like that. You're able to give them that amount of information. So I think that's a really great differentiator in terms of the information we can help consumers with when they're shopping online. Not to say you can't do that in store, but it's going to be that extra step. You're going to have to scan that QR code, which will take them down that journey, for example. So I think the other key way is starting when we spoke about how, who consumers trust most as well. And specifically in Asia, they really trust the accreditation process. So the likes of your B Corp or Fair Trade or your Rainforest Alliance, etc. So what that does is gives consumers that degree of certainty that brands have been through a process of validation to be able to say, you're not going to get that accreditation unless you can prove you're doing the right thing. And I think with the amount of claims that are out there, some of them quite generic in nature, by having that accreditation process and that stamp, it gives consumers confidence that they're making that right choice. Comparability of price is obviously key. I think we've already spoken about that in quite some detail. And I think retailers similarly can play a really important role here, in two ways. Is one, be it from a private label offering point of view, is to make sure that there are sustainable options within private label choices. Around the world, we've seen private label growth as a result of cost of living pressures. So a really big opportunity to tap into this consumer need. But also, I suppose, that opportunity that retailers can help in that ranging as well. So, again, from in store, be it having all sustainable items, in a similar aisle like we see in health food aisles, etc., or obviously online, is whether you're able to, sort things by, or search for things based on accreditation or based on sustainability, and that takes out that pain point for consumers, knowing that somebody else has done the hard work for them, and it gives them that confidence that, as I said, that they're making that right choice.
Last but not least, as companies strive to meet evolving consumer demand for sustainability, what are some of the potential pitfalls to watch out for, such as greenwashing? How can we ensure that sustainability remains a meaningful and authentic part of the shopping experience?
So I think you're right when you call out greenwashing, Chen, because I think, we're hearing more and more of it in the news, and it's not just, greenwashing on labels, it's greenwashing in banks, it's greenwashing everywhere. So I think, consumers are very aware that, it's happening. A number of countries around the world are, putting some quite strict regulatory requirements around that space as well. But we know from our study that 83% of our Asia Pacific consumers have said that they would stop buying from a company if they're found guilty of greenwashing. And again, that has a really big impact. So not only, once regulations come, is the financial penalties that may apply from doing that, or that you get removed from shelf from a retailer, for example, if you're found guilty of greenwashing, but it's also that erosion of consumer trust as well. So, and, I think at the end of the day, what it means is we are entering this new era of transparency, where companies are really going to need to take a step back and recalibrate their pack and their brand communications to make sure that any claims that they've got on their pack is that they're accurate, they're transparent, and importantly, that they can be validated, or else they're going to face, the repercussions, either financially or the consumer repercussions as well. So moving forward, I think what that's going to actually mean is, despite sustainability, increasing in importance and more brands, really catching in on the trend, I think we'll actually, in the short to medium term, we'll see less claims on pack, because companies will need to start removing unsubstantiated claims as they move forward. And, hopefully there will be increased certification and increased transparency as a result of that in the future. And that's really going to build that, consumer trust, as we said, that when you see a claim, hand on heart, that companies can back that up. Because I think, that is just where we are going as an industry. And if we can't do that, there won't be a future moving forward.
Thanks. That brings us to the end of today's episode. Thank you very much for your insight, Nicole.
No problem, Chen. Thanks very much for inviting me.
This is Lazada Insider. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Make sure you click follow and subscribe so you don't miss our latest insights and expert interviews. Thanks again for joining us. Until next time, take care.